A broke student with a stranger on a blind date to pay loans. Surprise, he was a wealthy CO. 3 rejection letters lay crumpled on her kitchen table. Each one a polite dismissal from tech companies that demanded experience she couldn't afford to gain. Her computer science degree, earned through sleepless nights and endless sacrifice, felt worthless when rent collectors came knocking. Have you ever felt so desperate that you'd marry a stranger for money? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. Zara Martinez stared at the eviction notice taped to her apartment door, her $80,000 student debt crushing her dreams like a vice. The emerald dress hanging in her closet, her grandmother's last gift, might be the only thing standing between her and homelessness. What she didn't know was that downloading a desperate contract marriage app would change everything. Have you ever felt so desperate that you'd marry a stranger for money? Stay with me as we follow Zara's shocking journey from rock bottom to the altar. 3 rejection letters lay crumpled on her kitchen table, each one a polite dismissal from tech companies that demanded experience she couldn't afford to gain. Her computer science degree, earned through sleepless nights and endless sacrifice, felt worthless when rent collectors came knocking. The numbers haunted her. Monthly payment, $847. Current salary from her 3 part-time jobs, $2,100. Rent, $950. Groceries, $200. Utilities, $180. The math was brutal, unforgiving. Her phone buzzed with another text from her mother. Mija, we can help with rent this month. But Zara knew better. Her parents, Maria and Carlos, cleaned office buildings 12 hours a day just to survive. They'd already sacrificed their retirement dreams for her education. She pulled out her grandmother's emerald dress, the one Abuela wore to her own wedding in 1962. The fabric still held hints of her perfume, still carried the weight of dreams from another generation. 3 generations of women had worn this dress to marry for love. Now Zara was considering wearing it to marry for money. The app notification glowed on her phone screen. Contract match, where financial solutions meet matrimonial arrangements. The reviews were mixed. Some called it exploitation. Others called it salvation. Her finger hovered over the download button. Every moral lesson her family taught her screamed against this choice. But the eviction notice whispered louder than her conscience. She created her profile with trembling hands. Age, 22. Education, computer science, Arizona State. Financial situation, desperate. Seeking, marriage contract, 1-year minimum. Compensation required, $50,000. The app's algorithm worked faster than she expected. Within hours, her phone chimed with a match notification. No photo, no name, just initials. Yes status, verified. Contract terms, acceptable. Meeting location, Phoenix Municipal Courthouse, Tuesday, 2 p.m. Her stomach lurched as reality crashed over her. She was actually going to do this. Marry a complete stranger. Some lonely middle-aged man who probably couldn't find companionship any other way. That night, she held her grandmother's dress against her chest and whispered an apology to 3 generations of women who'd married for love. Tomorrow, she'd break that tradition. Tomorrow, she'd become someone she never thought she could be. But as she stared at her reflection, she couldn't shake the feeling that this stranger might be hiding secrets far bigger than her own desperation. The app notification flashed again. Match confirmed. Courthouse tomorrow. $50,000 upon signing. Alexander Sterling stood in his Manhattan penthouse, surrounded by the artifacts of success, but drowning in isolation. The city sparkled below him like scattered diamonds, but the view felt as cold as the legal documents spread across his mahogany desk. His $2.3 billion acquisition had made headlines, but the real story was buried in his grandmother's will. The inheritance clause mocked him from the pristine legal paper. Marriage required by 25th birthday. No exceptions. His lawyer, Patricia Henley, adjusted her glasses with practiced patience. Alexander, your grandmother isn't joking. The additional $500 million and foundation chairmanship require a spouse. You have exactly 11 months. He laughed bitterly. At 24, he'd revolutionized artificial intelligence, built a company from his dorm room, and commanded respect from tech giants worldwide. But he couldn't command a single genuine relationship. The truth was uncomfortable. He'd spent his teenage years coding instead of dating. While classmates attended proms, he'd been debugging algorithms. While they learned to flirt, he'd mastered programming languages. Social interaction remained his greatest unsolved problem. His phone displayed 17 missed calls from matchmakers, socialites, and women who'd suddenly discovered his existence after the acquisition news broke. Their interest felt as artificial as the intelligence he'd programmed. What about arranged marriages? Patricia suggested. Your grandmother's generation understood practical unions. She wants authenticity, not convenience, Alexander replied, loosening his ash-gray tie. She's testing whether I can connect with another human being. The irony wasn't lost on him. His AI could recognize human emotions better than he could express them. His algorithms understood relationship patterns he'd never experienced personally. That evening, alone in his office, he stumbled across an article about contract marriages. The concept intrigued him. Clear terms, defined expectations, mutual benefit without emotional complications. It was essentially a business transaction he could actually understand. The contract match app seemed legitimate enough. Verified users, legal framework, transparent negotiations. He created a profile with clinical precision. AS24, tech executive, seeking, marriage contract for inheritance purposes, duration, 1 year minimum, compensation, negotiable. The algorithm matched him within hours. Z. Martinez, 22, recent graduate, financial need, significant. Her profile photo was deliberately obscured, but her education credentials impressed him. Computer science degree with honors. Someone who might understand his world. He authorized a $50,000 payment without hesitation. For him, it was lunch money. For her, it was probably life-changing. But as he prepared for the courthouse meeting, an unexpected emotion surfaced. Curiosity. Who was this woman desperate enough to marry a stranger? What circumstances had driven her to this choice? He selected his most formal ash-gray suit, armor for a battle he didn't understand. Tomorrow, he'd meet his contract bride and secure his inheritance. Simple, clean, efficient. What he didn't anticipate was that some contracts were written by fate, not lawyers. His assistant confirmed the appointment. Courthouse tomorrow, 2 p.m. Ms. Martinez will be wearing emerald green. 2 lives, 2 desperate choices, 1 courthouse, and 0 preparation for what was about to happen. Zara's hands shook as she applied lipstick in her apartment's cracked mirror. The emerald dress fit perfectly, just as it had fit her grandmother decades ago. But today it felt like a costume for a role she'd never auditioned for. Abuela, forgive me, she whispered to the photograph on her dresser. Meanwhile, across the city, Alexander straightened his ash-gray suit jacket with mechanical precision. His reflection showed a man who'd conquered Silicon Valley, but couldn't conquer his own awkwardness around women. The courthouse documents were organized in his briefcase with the same attention to detail he applied to coding. Both left their homes at exactly 1:30 p.m. Both took different routes to the same destination. Both carried expectations that reality was about to demolish. Zara arrived first, her stomach churning with every step up the courthouse stairs. She'd imagined her contract husband as a desperate middle-aged man, balding, awkward, probably divorced. Someone as desperate as she was, just for different reasons. Alexander's limousine pulled up precisely at 1:58 p.m. He emerged, checked his watch, and walked toward the entrance with the confidence of a man who'd never failed at anything that mattered. They passed each other in the lobby. Zara noticed his expensive shoes. Alexander noticed the flash of emerald fabric. Neither registered the significance. Zara sat in the family court waiting area, watching other couples. Real couples. People who'd fallen in love, gotten engaged, planned weddings. She felt like an imposter among the authentic. Alexander approached the information desk with characteristic efficiency. Sterling, 2 p.m. appointment. Contract marriage documentation. The clerk's raised eyebrow didn't faze him. He learned to ignore judgment about his unconventional business decisions. They sat 12 feet apart, both checking their phones, both wondering if they should flee. The courthouse clock ticked toward 2 p.m. like a countdown to mutual destruction. Alexander expected to meet a woman desperate enough to sell her future for money, someone he could manage like a business arrangement. Zara expected to meet a man pathetic enough to buy companionship, someone she could tolerate for 1 year while rebuilding her life. Neither expected the courthouse clerk to call out, "Martinez and Sterling, you're up next." Neither expected to look up and lock eyes across the waiting room. Neither expected their first thought to be, "This can't be right." The clerk repeated the call, impatient now. "Martinez and Sterling. Don't keep the judge waiting." Two strangers stood simultaneously, staring at each other in mutual shock, about to discover that some mistakes change everything. Time stopped. Sound disappeared. The courthouse lobby faded into background blur as Zara Martinez and Alexander Sterling stared at each other across 12 feet of polished marble floor. This couldn't be happening. Alexander's first thought was immediate and obvious. The app had malfunctioned. His contract bride was supposed to be desperate, grateful, manageable. Not this breathtaking woman in emerald silk who looked like she'd stepped out of a classic Hollywood film. Zara's mind reeled with equal confusion. Her contract husband was supposed to be some pathetic middle-aged man buying companionship. Not this devastatingly handsome billionaire who looked like he'd never needed to buy anything he couldn't earn with charm. Martinez and Sterling. The clerk's voice cut through their mutual shock. "The judge is waiting." Alexander recovered first, his business training kicking in. He approached Zara with the same confident stride he used in boardrooms, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. "I'm Alexander Sterling," he said, extending his hand. "I believe we have an appointment." Zara's grandmother had taught her never to show weakness, especially to powerful men. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "Zara Martinez, though I think there's been some kind of mistake." "No mistake," Alexander replied, though his own certainty was cracking. "Yorzy Martinez, computer science graduate, financial situation, significant?" The delicate way he phrased her desperation stung. "And your AS, tech executive, buying a wife to solve your inheritance problems?" Their words hung in the air like accusations. Around them, the courthouse continued its normal operations. Real couples getting married, families resolving disputes, lives changing through legal procedures. But nothing felt normal about this moment. "We should proceed," Alexander said, though his voice lacked its usual commanding tone. "The judge is waiting, and the terms are already agreed upon." Zara wanted to run. Every instinct screamed that she was out of her league, about to make a catastrophic mistake. But the eviction notice was still in her purse, and her student loan payment was still due in 17 days. They walked toward the courtroom in silence, each lost in private panic. Alexander's world was built on control, prediction, logical outcomes. Nothing about this felt controllable. Zara's world was built on survival, adaptation, making impossible choices. This felt like the most impossible choice yet. Judge Patricia Ramirez looked up from her paperwork with a weary expression of someone who'd seen every variety of human decision-making. "Contract marriage documentation?" "Yes, Your Honor," Alexander replied, his business persona sliding back into place. The judge reviewed their paperwork with professional efficiency. "Mr. Sterling, you're entering this marriage for inheritance purposes. Ms. Martinez, you're entering for financial compensation. Both parties understand this is a legal contract with specified terms and duration." "Yes, Your Honor," they replied in unison, their voices strangely harmonious. "Any objections before we proceed?" Alexander looked at Zara. She was beautiful, intelligent, and clearly desperate enough to be here. He could work with that. Zara looked at Alexander. He was gorgeous, wealthy, and apparently lonely enough to buy companionship. She could survive that. No objections, Alexander said. None, Zara agreed. But as they signed their names to the marriage certificate, both wondered what they'd just committed to. The marriage certificate felt like a loaded weapon in Zara's hands. 30 minutes ago, she'd been single and drowning in debt. Now she was Mrs. Alexander Sterling, married to a stranger who could probably buy her entire neighborhood without checking his bank balance. "We need to talk," Alexander said as they left the courthouse. "My car is waiting." Zara looked at the sleek black limousine idling at the curb and felt her courage falter. This was really happening. She'd married a billionaire tech mogul who wore suits that cost more than her annual salary. The interior of the limousine was a mobile office, leather seats, built-in bar, screens displaying stock prices. Alexander pressed a button, raising the partition between them and the driver. "Lunch?" he asked, his tone polite but distant. "I'm not hungry," Zara lied. She'd skipped breakfast, too nervous to eat. "We're going to Loop Bernardine," Alexander said, giving the driver an address. "We need to establish the parameters of our arrangement." Loop Bernardine. Zara had heard of it, the kind of restaurant where appetizers cost more than her weekly grocery budget. She smoothed her grandmother's dress and tried to look like she belonged in this world. The restaurant was everything she'd expected. Hushed conversations, crystal glasses, servers who moved like dancers. Alexander was clearly a regular. The maitre d' greeted him by name, led them to a private corner table. "I'll have the tasting menu," Alexander told the server. "And bring us your best champagne. We're celebrating." Celebrating. The word felt surreal. This was her wedding day, and she was sitting across from a stranger who just purchased her for the price of a luxury car. "Let's address the obvious," Alexander said once they were alone. "Neither of us expected this." "You mean neither of us expected our contract spouse to be attractive?" Zara's directness surprised them both. Alexander paused, champagne glass halfway to his lips. "I expected someone more grateful, and I expected someone more desperate." They stared at each other across the table, each recognizing that their assumptions had been obliterated. The power dynamic they'd both anticipated had shifted into something more complex. "Here are the terms," Alexander continued, pulling out his phone. "I need a wife to satisfy my grandmother's inheritance requirements. Public appearances, family functions, maintain the illusion of a genuine relationship. In exchange, $50,000 immediately, plus living expenses for 1 year." His phone chimed with a bank transfer notification. He showed her the screen. $50,000 deposited to her account. Zara's heart stopped. $50,000. Her student loans, her rent, her parents' medical bills, all solvable with numbers on a screen. "What about?" She paused, unsure how to phrase the question. "Physical intimacy?" Alexander's business tone didn't waver. "Not required. Separate bedrooms. This is a contractual arrangement, not a romance." But as he said the words, both wondered why that clarification felt more like a challenge than a comfort. "There's just one thing," Alexander added. "My grandmother's 80th birthday party is in 2 weeks. You'll need to convince her we're genuinely in love." Zara nearly choked on her champagne. "Convince her we're in love? We just met." Alexander smiled for the first time since the courthouse. "Welcome to the hardest role you'll ever play, Mrs. Sterling." 3 days later, Zara stood in the most expensive boutique she'd ever entered, watching a woman named Vivian critique every aspect of her existence. "Posture, darling. Shoulders back. You're married to Alexander Sterling, not applying for a job at Target." Vivian's British accent made every correction sound like a personal attack. Alexander had hired Vivian Blackwood, etiquette coach to Manhattan's elite, to transform Zara from desperate college graduate into convincing billionaire's wife. The transformation felt like betraying everyone she'd ever been. "Walk again. This time, imagine you owned a room." Zara wanted to scream that she'd never owned anything, let alone a room. But the $50,000 in her bank account kept her mouth shut and her feet moving. Alexander watched from the boutique's private seating area, his laptop open, conducting business while his wife learned to be someone else. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. He was paying someone to teach her to pretend to love him. "The charity gala is tomorrow night," Vivian announced. Your first public appearance as Mrs. Sterling. The press will be watching, the social media influencers will be filming, and every woman in Manhattan will be dissecting your every move. Zara's stomach clenched. She'd never been to a charity gala. She'd never worn a dress that cost more than her monthly rent. She'd never been photographed by paparazzi. "What if I mess up?" she asked Alexander during a fitting break. "You won't," he replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. The evening gown Vivian selected was stunning. Midnight blue silk that transformed Zara into someone she didn't recognize. Alexander chose a complimentary tuxedo, and when they stood together in the mirror, they looked like a magazine cover. "Now, the most important part," Vivian said. "You need to appear madly in love. Touch his arm when you laugh. Lean into him during photographs. Make everyone believe you can't keep your hands off each other." Alexander's jaw tightened. Physical contact wasn't in their contract. "What's your love story?" Vivian demanded. "How did you meet? When did you know he was the one?" Zara and Alexander exchanged glances. They'd been so focused on the legal arrangement, they'd forgotten they needed a romantic backstory. "College," Alexander said quickly. "We met in college. But you went to MIT, and I went to Arizona State," Zara protested. "Summer program," Alexander improvised. "Coding boot camp. Love at first album." Vivian rolled her eyes. "That's the most unromantic love story I've ever heard. We need to work on the chemistry." She made them practice holding hands, gazing into each other's eyes, sharing intimate moments. Every touch felt electric and warm. Every glance felt too real for comfort. "Better," Vivian declared. "Now remember, tomorrow night, you're not Zara Martinez from Phoenix. You're Mrs. Alexander Sterling, and you're desperately in love with your husband." But as they practiced their fake romance, both wondered why the pretending was starting to feel dangerously real. The charity gala was a battlefield disguised as a party. Manhattan's elite gathered at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, their diamonds competing with the chandeliers for brilliance. Zara had never felt more out of place in her life. "Remember, you're madly in love," Alexander whispered as they approached the red carpet. His hand on her back felt warm through the silk of her dress. Flash bulbs exploded as they posed for photographers. Zara's smile felt frozen on her face, but Alexander's arm around her waist provided unexpected comfort. They looked perfect together, the tech mogul and his mysterious new wife. "Mr. Sterling, who's your beautiful companion?" a reporter shouted. "My wife, Zara Sterling," Alexander replied smoothly. "We're very private people at a public event." The contradiction would have been funny if Zara wasn't terrified of being exposed as a fraud. Inside the museum, the real performance began. Alexander introduced her to tech entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and old money families who've been funding Manhattan's cultural institutions for generations. Each introduction felt like a test she wasn't prepared for. "Zara, darling," a woman in diamonds approached with predatory grace. "I am Charlotte Pemberton. I simply must know everything about your whirlwind romance with Alexander." Zara's throat went dry. This was exactly what Vivian had warned her about. Manhattan's social investigators who could smell deception from across a crowded room. "It's quite a story," Zara managed. "Oh, please tell. We're all dying to know how our elusive bachelor finally got caught." Alexander appeared at her side, his hand finding hers with surprising naturalness. "Actually, Charlotte, I was the one who got caught. Zara had me wrapped around her finger from the moment we met." His thumb traced across her knuckles, and Zara felt her breath catch. It was supposed to be acting, but her body didn't know the difference. How romantic, and where was this magical meeting? "MIT summer program," Alexander said. "I was teaching advanced algorithms, and Zara was the only student who could keep up with me." The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. But when he looked at Zara, his eyes held something that didn't feel like acting. She challenged every assumption I had about programming and about myself. Zara found herself lost in his gaze, forgetting they had an audience. He made me realize that solving problems was about more than just code. It was about understanding human behavior. They were improvising now, building their fake love story in real time. But the words felt true, even if the timeline was invented. Simply magical, Charlotte declared. Though I must say, it's quite sudden. Most people date for years before marriage. When you know, Zara replied, surprising herself with her conviction. Alexander's smile was genuine this time. Exactly. Why waste time when you found your person? But as they danced later that evening, moving together with unexpected grace, both wondered if they were still acting or if something real was happening between them. The song ended, and reality crashed back. They were strangers playing a role, nothing more. Or so they kept telling themselves. 1 week after the gala, Zara sat in her new apartment. Alexander's gift, he'd called it, staring at a plane ticket to Seattle. The job offer had come through email that morning. Junior developer position, $85,000 starting salary, far from the suffocating world of Manhattan high society. She could leave, honor the contract terms, take the money, and disappear into a normal life where she didn't have to pretend to be someone else every day. The apartment felt too luxurious, too much like a prison made of marble and silk. Every surface reminded her that she was living a lie, playing a role that was slowly consuming her real identity. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. Grandmother wants to meet you. Tonight, dinner at her estate. Panic shot through her chest. Eleanor Sterling was Manhattan royalty, a woman who could detect fraud from across a dinner table. If anyone could expose their arrangement, it would be Alexander's grandmother. But before she could respond, her phone rang. Her mother's number. Mija, your father is in the hospital. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her careful escape plans crumbled as her mother explained. Chest pains, emergency room, tests that would cost thousands they didn't have. I'll be there in 4 hours, Zara promised, already grabbing her keys. She called Alexander from the airport. Family emergency. I have to go to Phoenix. What about dinner with my grandmother? Tell her I'm sick. Tell her anything. My father, her voice cracked. I'm coming with you. What? No, this isn't part of our arrangement. You're my wife. Your family is my family. I'll have the jet ready in 20 minutes. Zara wanted to argue, but the relief in her mother's voice when she called back with the news that her husband was arranging private medical care was worth more than pride. Alexander's private jet was a revelation. Leather seats, full bar, Wi-Fi that actually worked. But Zara couldn't appreciate the luxury when her father was fighting for his life. He's going to be okay, Alexander said quietly, closing his laptop. The doctors I contacted are the best cardiac specialists in Arizona. You don't have to do this. This isn't what you paid for. Maybe not, but it's what I want to do. The flight to Phoenix was turbulent, but not as turbulent as Zara's emotions. Alexander handled the medical arrangements, the hospital transfers, the insurance paperwork, all with the efficiency of someone accustomed to solving problems with money and connections. At the hospital, her parents were overwhelmed by the sudden appearance of their daughter's mysterious husband. Alexander charmed her mother in broken Spanish, discussed sports with her father, and somehow made her family feel like they'd known him for years. He's a good man, Mija, her mother whispered. The way he looks at you. But Zara knew better. Alexander Sterling was many things. Brilliant, generous, surprisingly kind. But he wasn't hers. Not really. Their connection was a contract, nothing more. Even if it was starting to feel like everything. The hospital waiting room at 3 a.m. revealed truths that daylight had hidden. Zara's father was stable, sleeping peacefully thanks to medication that cost more than most people's cars. Alexander sat beside her, his expensive suit wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. You didn't have to stay, Zara said for the 10th time. Where else would I be? It was a simple question that carried complex implications. Alexander Sterling, who owned penthouses and private jets, was choosing to spend his night in a hospital waiting room in Phoenix, Arizona. Zara's laptop sat open on the table between them, displaying the Seattle job offer. She'd been working on her resignation letter when he fell asleep, his head tilted back against the uncomfortable chair. That's when she saw it. His laptop screen had gone dark, but as she reached to close it, the display flickered back to life. The Sterling Foundation website filled the screen, showing scholarship recipients, student debt relief programs, and anonymous donations totaling millions of dollars. Her breath caught. There, in the list of recent scholarship recipients, was her own name. Not Zara Martinez Sterling, but Zara Martinez, Arizona State University, Computer Science. The scholarship had been awarded 6 months ago, before they met, before the contract marriage app, before everything. "You've been awake for 20 minutes, Alexander said without opening his eyes. "Are you going to ask me about it? Or just stare at my laptop all night? You've been helping students like me for years." "Yes, my scholarship wasn't random. You specifically chose me." Alexander opened his eyes, meeting her gaze directly. "I review every application personally. Your essay about using technology to help underserved communities, it reminded me why I started programming in the first place." So this whole contract marriage thing had nothing to do with your scholarship. That was pure coincidence, or fate, depending on your perspective. Zara's mind reeled. "You could have mentioned this earlier, and sound like some creepy billionaire who'd been tracking you. I figured you'd think I was manipulating you. Aren't you?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know anymore. Everything about this situation has become more complicated than I planned. Because your grandmother's inheritance is at stake? Because I'm falling in love with my fake wife." The words hung between them, like a confession and a challenge. Zara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she couldn't look away from his eyes. "Alex, I know this wasn't part of the contract. I know you're planning to leave after our year is up. Hell, I know you're planning to leave now." He gestured toward her laptop. "Seattle job offer. Good salary. Fresh start. How did you?" "I've been falling for you since the courthouse, Zara. Since you walked into that restaurant and challenged every assumption I had about this arrangement. Since you made me laugh at the gala. Since you made me want to be better than just a guy who solves problems with money." Zara's father stirred in his hospital bed, and the moment shattered. But as they sat in the darkness, both pretending to sleep, neither could ignore the truth that had been revealed. Their contract marriage was becoming something neither of them had bargained for. Something that felt dangerously like love. The photograph appeared on page 6 3 days later. Alexander Sterling and his mysterious wife in a hospital waiting room, her head on his shoulder, his hand protective over hers. The headline read, "Tech billionaire's marriage of convenience exposed." Zara's phone buzzed with notifications. Reporters calling, social media exploding, her face plastered across gossip websites. The carefully constructed facade of their relationship was crumbling in real time. "How did they find out?" Zara asked, staring at the newspaper in Alexander's Manhattan office. "Someone at the hospital," Alexander replied, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Or the airport, or the courthouse. Does it matter?" The article was devastating. An investigative reporter named Marcus Webb had connected the dots. The sudden marriage, the contract marriage app, the convenient timing with Alexander's inheritance deadline. Every detail of their private arrangement was now public entertainment. The Sterling Foundation's anonymous donations, the scholarship programs, the student debt relief. It's all connected to Alexander Sterling's elaborate scheme to secure his inheritance through a fraudulent marriage, Webb had written. Zara's phone rang. Her mother. "Mija, the reporters are at our house. They're asking questions about you and Alexander, about money, about whether your marriage is real." "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Is it true? What they're saying?" Zara closed her eyes. "It's complicated. Either you love him or you don't, Mija. There's nothing complicated about that." But her mother was wrong. Everything about love was complicated, especially when it grew from a contract designed to prevent it. Alexander was pacing behind his desk, fielding calls from his board of directors, his publicists, his lawyers. The media storm was threatening more than their fake marriage. It was threatening his company, his foundation, his entire reputation. "We need to make a statement," his publicist said over speakerphone. "Control the narrative before it destroys everything you've built." "What kind of statement?" Alexander asked. "Admit the marriage was arranged for business purposes. Emphasize your philanthropic work. Make Zara disappear quietly. Make Zara disappear." The words hit her like a physical blow. She was the problem, the mistake, the complication that needed to be erased. "No," Alexander said firmly. "We're not throwing Zara under the bus. Alexander, be realistic. Your inheritance is at stake. Your company's reputation. I don't care about the inheritance. The room fell silent. Zara stared at him, unable to process what he had just said. You don't care about $500 million, his publicist asked. I care about my wife. Wife. The word hit differently now, charged with meaning that hadn't existed when they'd signed their contract. Then you need to prove it, the publicist said. Publicly, convincingly, because right now, the entire world thinks your marriage is a fraud. Alexander looked at Zara, his eyes full of questions she wasn't ready to answer. What if it's not? He asked quietly. What if what's not? What if our marriage isn't a fraud anymore? Outside, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. But inside Alexander's office, two people who'd started as strangers faced the possibility that their fake love had become terrifyingly real. Alexander Sterling had faced hostile takeovers, corporate espionage, and venture capitalists who tried to steal his company. But nothing had prepared him for the vulnerability of loving someone who might not love him back. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. His publicist had prepared a statement that would salvage his reputation while sacrificing Zara's. His board of directors had made their position clear. Choose the inheritance and the company, or choose the girl. They didn't understand that there was no choice. Not anymore. You can't do this, Zara said, pacing his office like a caged animal. Your inheritance, your company, everything you've worked for, means nothing without you. Alexander, be realistic. I'm nobody. I'm a girl from Phoenix who married you for money. You're my wife. You're the woman who made me remember why I wanted to help people in the first place. You're the person who makes me want to be better than just a guy who solves problems with checkbooks. The press conference room was packed. Reporters, photographers, business journalists, and gossip columnists all waited for Alexander Sterling to explain his fraudulent marriage to a desperate college graduate. Alexander walked to the podium alone. Zara watched from the back of the room, her heart breaking for what she was about to witness. The destruction of a good man's reputation because he'd been foolish enough to fall for his contract wife. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander began, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding him. I'm here to address recent allegations about my marriage to Zara Martinez Sterling. The room fell silent. Cameras focused. Reporters leaned forward. The allegations are true. Our marriage began as a contractual arrangement. I needed a wife to satisfy inheritance requirements. She needed financial assistance. We entered into a legal agreement that benefited both parties. Murmurs rippled through the audience. This wasn't the denial they'd expected. However, Alexander continued, his voice gaining strength. Something unexpected happened. I fell in love with my wife. The murmurs stopped. The room held its breath. Zara Martinez is brilliant, compassionate, and stronger than anyone I've ever known. She's faced challenges that would destroy most people, and she's emerged with her integrity intact. She married me for money, yes, but I married her hoping to find something money can't buy: genuine human connection. Alexander's eyes found Zara in the crowd. I've spent years using my wealth to solve problems from a distance. Anonymous donations, faceless philanthropy, keeping the world at arm's length. But Zara forced me to step into the light, to be vulnerable, to risk everything for something real. He pulled out a document, thick, official, stamped with legal seals. This is my grandmother's will, the inheritance requirements that started this whole arrangement. As of today, I'm formally declining the inheritance. All $500 million will go directly to the Sterling Foundation's Student Debt Relief Program. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. But Alexander only had eyes for Zara. I don't need my grandmother's money to prove I'm worthy of love. And I don't need a contract to prove I'm worthy of my wife. Zara, if you'll have me, not as a business arrangement, but as a man who's completely, desperately in love with you, I'd like to start over. He pulled out a small velvet box. Will you marry me? For real this time. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to Zara, who stood frozen at the back of the room, tears streaming down her face. This was the moment that would define the rest of their lives. Zara's legs felt like water as she walked through the crowd of reporters toward the podium. Every step was a choice, between safety and risk, between the known and the unknown, between the girl who'd married for money and the woman who might dare to marry for love. "Yes," she said, her voice barely audible. "Yes." Alexander's face transformed with hope and disbelief. "Yes, I'll marry you. For real this time." The press conference erupted into chaos, but Alexander had already left the podium, already crossed the distance between them, already pulled her into his arms like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. "Are you sure?" he whispered against her hair. "Because I just gave away $500 million on live television, and I'm pretty sure there's no going back from that." "I'm sure," Zara replied, though her heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear her own voice. "But I have one condition. Anything. We do this right. Dating, engagement, planning a real wedding. No more contracts, no more arrangements. Just us figuring out if this crazy thing between us is actually love or just really good acting." Alexander laughed, and the sound was lighter than anything she'd heard from him before. "Deal. Though I should warn you, I'm terrible at dating. I've spent more time with algorithms than actual humans. Lucky for you, I'm excellent at teaching." They left the press conference together, ignoring the shouted questions and flashing cameras. For the first time since their courthouse wedding, they were writing their own story instead of following someone else's script. The next 3 months were a revelation. Alexander learned that Zara liked terrible romantic comedies and could code complex algorithms while eating cereal for dinner. Zara learned that Alexander was secretly funny, surprisingly thoughtful, and completely hopeless at anything that couldn't be solved with logic and money. They went on actual dates, coffee shops, museums, even a disastrous attempt at mini golf where Alexander's competitive nature collided with his complete lack of athletic ability. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears about whether two people from such different worlds could actually build something real together. "What if we're just good at pretending?" Zara asked one evening as they walked through Central Park. "Then we're the best actors in the world," Alexander replied, stopping to face her. "Because I'm not pretending when I say I love you. I'm not pretending when I say I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. And I'm definitely not pretending when I say I can't imagine my world without you in it." He was right. The connection between them wasn't performance. It was the most real thing either of them had ever experienced. But as they planned their real wedding, both wondered if love would be enough to bridge the gap between their two worlds permanently. Some fairy tales, after all, were harder to live than to dream. Eleanor Sterling had been watching her grandson's public romance with the sharp eye of a woman who'd survived 80 years of Manhattan society. She'd seen Alexander's press conference, witnessed his grand gesture, observed his obvious transformation from isolated billionaire to love-struck man. But she hadn't said a word about it. Until now. "Zara, dear, please join me for tea." Eleanor's invitation was polite, but non-negotiable. Alone, Alexander's grandmother lived in a Fifth Avenue penthouse that was more museum than home. Priceless art, antique furniture, and the kind of old money elegance that couldn't be bought, only inherited. "You're nervous," Eleanor observed as Zara perched on the edge of a chair that probably cost more than most people's cars. Terrified, Zara admitted, "Good, that means you care about the outcome." Eleanor poured tea with practiced grace, her movements precise despite her age. "I've known about your arrangement since the beginning." Zara's teacup rattled against its saucer. "You have, my dear. I've been managing family fortunes and family secrets for 6 decades. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate the woman my grandson suddenly married? Then why didn't you stop it?" Eleanor smiled, and for the first time, Zara saw where Alexander had inherited his sharp intelligence. "Because I wanted to see what would happen." Alexander had spent his entire life avoiding genuine human connection. His parents' divorce, his social awkwardness, his tendency to solve emotional problems with money. He'd built walls that I feared would never come down. "So you used me. I used both of you. The inheritance clause was real, but I would have found a way around it if necessary. What I couldn't manufacture was genuine emotion. It had to be real, or it would never last. Zara set down her teacup, her hands shaking slightly. And if it wasn't real, if we just played out the contract and separated, then Alexander would have learned that love can't be bought, only earned. A valuable lesson for a man with unlimited resources. But it is real, Zara said quietly. What's between us? It's terrifying and complicated and nothing like what I expected, but it's real. I know, dear. I've watched you both transform over these past months. Alexander is more open, more vulnerable, more human than I've ever seen him. And you've grown from a desperate girl willing to sell her future into a woman confident enough to demand a real relationship. Eleanor reached across the table, covering Zara's hand with her own. The inheritance was never about the money. It was about ensuring Alexander learned to value what money can't buy. You taught him that lesson better than I ever could. Does this mean you approve? My dear, I've been planning your real wedding since the day you walked into that courthouse. Though I do hope you'll choose something more elegant than that dreadful municipal building. Zara laughed through her tears. I think we can manage that. Excellent. Because the Sterling family has a reputation to maintain. The Sterling family estate in the Hamptons had hosted presidents, celebrities, and captains of industry, but had never seen a wedding quite like this one. Where Alexander and Zara's first wedding had been sterile and transactional, their second was alive with genuine joy and carefully orchestrated chaos. I can't believe you invited half of Manhattan, Zara said, adjusting her wedding dress in the bridal suite. This dress was nothing like her grandmother's emerald vintage gown. This was pure white silk, custom designed, and worth more than most people's houses. But she kept her grandmother's pearl necklace, a reminder of where she'd come from. Eleanor invited half of Manhattan, Alexander replied through the door. I would have been happy with just you, me, and a judge. We already did that. This time, we're doing it right. The ceremony was held in Eleanor's rose garden, with 200 guests watching Alexander Sterling, tech mogul, philanthropist, and former Manhattan's most eligible bachelor, marry the woman who taught him the difference between a contract and a commitment. When the officiant asked for their vows, Alexander pulled out a handwritten note, his hand surprisingly steady. Zara, 6 months ago, I thought I knew what I wanted. Success, wealth, control over every aspect of my life. I thought love was a complication I could avoid, a problem I could solve with logic and careful planning. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. Then I met you, and you changed everything. You challenged me, surprised me, made me laugh when I didn't think I remembered how. You showed me that the best things in life can't be programmed, purchased, or predicted. They can only be felt. You looked directly at her, and Zara felt her heart stop. I promise to love you not because of contract, but because of choice. Every day, for the rest of our lives, I choose you. I choose us. I choose this beautiful, complicated, unpredictable thing we've built together. Zara's vows were shorter, but no less powerful. Alexander, you saved me from drowning, but not in the way either of us expected. You didn't rescue me with money. You rescued me with patience, kindness, and the courage to believe that someone like me could be worthy of someone like you. She smiled through her tears. I promise to love you not because you're perfect, but because you're perfectly imperfect. I promise to challenge you, support you, and remind you that the best algorithms are the ones written by the heart. When they kissed, it wasn't for the cameras or the contracts or the inheritance requirements. It was for themselves, for the journey they'd taken from strangers to partners, to lovers to husband and wife. The reception was a celebration of more than their marriage. It was a celebration of transformation, of two people who'd found love in the most unlikely circumstances and had the courage to make it real. As they danced their first dance as a genuinely married couple, Alexander whispered, "No regrets. About giving up $500 million for me? None at all." "Good," Zara replied, "because I'm about to be very expensive to maintain." Alexander laughed, spinning her around the dance floor. "I wouldn't have it any other way." 1 year later, Zara Sterling stood in the conference room of the Sterling Foundation, presenting their annual report to the board of directors. The numbers were staggering. Over 10,000 students had received debt relief. Hundreds of scholarships had been awarded, and the foundation had become the largest privately funded education initiative in the country. The impact goes beyond financial assistance, Zara explained, clicking through her presentation. We're changing how people think about education, opportunity, and the responsibility that comes with wealth. Alexander watched from the back of the room, his pride evident. His wife had transformed from desperate college graduate to foundation co-director, bringing passion and personal experience to their philanthropic work. After the meeting, they walked through Central Park, a ritual they'd maintained since their real courtship began. Autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet, and the late afternoon sun painted everything golden. "Remember when you thought I was just some pathetic middle-aged man buying companionship?" Alexander asked, pulling her close. "Remember when you thought I was just some grateful, desperate girl who'd be easy to manage?" Zara countered. They'd learned to laugh about their initial assumptions, though both acknowledged how wrong they'd been about almost everything that mattered. "What do you think would have happened if we'd met differently?" Zara asked. "If you just walked into some coffee shop and I've been working there, you would have intimidated me into silence, and I would have ordered my coffee without making eye contact. And I would have thought you were another arrogant rich guy who didn't see service workers as human beings. We would have completely missed each other," Alexander realized. "Maybe we needed the contract to break down our walls," Zara suggested. "Maybe we needed to start with something artificial to discover something real." Their apartment, they'd moved out of Alexander's penthouse into something smaller, more comfortable, more them, was filled with evidence of their merged lives. Zara's coding books sat next to Alexander's business journals. Her grandmother's pictures shared space with his family portraits. Her practical furniture balanced his expensive art. "I have something for you," Alexander said, pulling out a small wrapped package. Inside was a jewelry box containing a simple gold chain. Hanging from it was a small charm, a tiny emerald dress. "So you never forget where we started," he said, fastening it around her neck. "And where we're going," Zara added, touching the charm. They learned that love wasn't a contract to be negotiated or a problem to be solved. It was a choice to be made every day, a commitment that grew stronger with each challenge they faced together. The girl who'd married for money had become a woman who'd found something worth more than any inheritance. The man who'd bought a wife had discovered that the best things in life couldn't be purchased. They could only be earned through vulnerability, trust, and the courage to let someone see who you really were. Their contract had expired. Their love was just beginning.